The Outer Banks of North Carolina had been my sanctuary for over 40 years. I moved here with Thomas, my late husband, when we were barely more than children ourselves. The salt air and constant whisper of the ocean became the backdrop to our love story, our struggles, and eventually, our small triumph, this house. That morning started like any other spring day. I woke before sunrise, made my tea. In the chipped blue mug Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary, and watched the sky change colors from my kitchen window. The garden called to me. It always did this time of year. The daffodils would be in full bloom, and the hydrangeas needed pruning. I packed a small wicker basket with gardening shears, put on my wide-brimmed hat, and drove the 30 minutes from my small apartment in town to the beach house. I never expected to find 3 unfamiliar cars in the driveway. As I approached, I noticed the curtains, the ones I'd sewn by hand during those lonely nights after Thomas passed, had been replaced with garish purple drapes. Music blared from inside, punctuated by unfamiliar laughter. For a moment, I wondered if I'd somehow driven to the wrong house. But no, there was the crooked mailbox Thomas had installed, the stone path I'd laid myself, one smooth rock at a time. I walked to the door, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Before I could reach for my key, the door swung open, and there stood Megan, my daughter-in-law of 5 years. Eleanor? Her voice carried a note of irritation barely masked by fake surprise. What are you doing here? I've come to tend my garden, I said simply, trying to peer past her into what had always been my living room. The daffodils need— Oh, we've been taking care of all that. She cut me off, not moving from the doorway. You should have called first. Behind her, I could see unfamiliar faces. A woman who shared Megan's sharp nose and calculating eyes, a balding man sprawled on my sofa, children racing through the hallway. I didn't think I needed to call before coming to my own home, I said quietly. Something flickered across Megan's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or guilt quickly suppressed. She stepped onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. Eleanor, Robert and I have been meaning to talk to you about the house. You know, with your arthritis getting worse and living alone in town, it doesn't make sense for you to keep such a big property. My arthritis was mild at worst, and I'd never complained about it to her. Where's Robert? I asked, ignoring her comment. Business trip, San Francisco. He'll be back Tuesday. She tucked her hair behind her ear, a tell I'd noticed years ago whenever she lied. Look, we're having a family weekend. My parents are here, my sister and her kids. It's not really a good time. I'll just be in the garden, I insisted, taking a step toward the side path. Her hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. Eleanor, I said it's not a good time. A woman appeared in the doorway behind her. Similar features, but harder somehow. Megan's sister, I presumed. Everything okay out here? She asked, eyeing me like I was a door-to-door. Salesman. Fine, Veronica. Eleanor was just leaving. Megan's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. I only need 10 minutes in the garden, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor building in my chest. Then I'll be on my way. Veronica laughed, high and sharp. Megan, you weren't kidding. She really doesn't get it. Megan's expression shifted then, the polite mask falling away completely. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. You don't belong here anymore, Eleanor. Go back to whatever sad little life you had before. This house is ours now. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. What are you talking about? This is my house. Thomas and I built it. It's Robert's house now, Megan interrupted. He's been paying the taxes for years, handling all the maintenance. You've been living in town, barely visiting. We need this place. For our family, for our future. My name is on the deed, I said, my voice suddenly strong, fueled by decades of sacrifice and love poured into every board and nail of this place. Something like uncertainty flickered in Megan's eyes, but Veronica chimed in again. Not for long. Robert's taking care of all that. The implication was clear as crystal. My own son was trying to take my house from under me. The house I'd cleaned houses to pay for. The house where I'd raised him after Thomas died when Robert was only 12. The house that held every memory I had of the life I'd built. I want to speak to Robert, I managed to say. He's busy, Megan snapped. And frankly, he agrees with me. It's time for you to let go, Eleanor. You're too old to manage this place anyway. I looked past her, into what had once been my living room. Thomas's armchair, the one I'd kept in perfect condition for 20 years, was gone. replaced by some leather monstrosity. The walls, once the soft blue of a robin's egg, were now stark white. My quilt, the wedding ring pattern I'd spent 3 winters stitching, was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't just a house they were taking, it was my history, my heart, my medications, I said suddenly. I left them in the bathroom cabinet. I'll mail them to you. Megan cut me off, already closing the door. Through the narrowing gap, I saw a child, one of Veronica's, I presumed, playing with the small wooden box Thomas had carved for me on our first anniversary. The box that held his wedding ring, the lock of hair from Robert's first haircut, the sand dollar we'd found on our last walk together before the cancer took him. The door closed in my face with finality. I stood there, the spring breeze suddenly cold against my skin, clutching my garden shears in a white-knuckled grip. Through the window, I could see them laughing, moving through my space like I'd never existed. Megan returned to the porch swing, the one Thomas had hung, and picked up my favorite mug, taking a long sip while staring directly at me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or pound on the door. I turned and walked back to my car, placed my garden basket carefully on the passenger seat, and drove away. But I wasn't defeated. Not by a long shot. Because in my purse, nestled between my wallet and reading glasses, was something Megan didn't know existed. The original deed to the house, the property survey, and a folder of documents I'd kept safe for exactly this kind of rainy day. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The drive back to town passed in a blur of ocean views and roadside wildflowers, my mind racing, faster than my old Buick ever could. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, a modest complex favored by retirees and young professionals not yet ready for mortgage commitments, I had the beginnings of a plan. My apartment was small but intentional, a one-bedroom sanctuary I'd moved into 3 years ago when the isolation of the beach house became too much during winter. Months. Robert had encouraged the move, citing concerns about my safety living so far from everything during the off-season. I'd maintained the beach house for summers and weekends, treasuring the rhythm of splitting my time between town and shore. Now, I understood his true motivation. Inside, I headed straight for my home office, really just a corner of the living room with a small desk and filing cabinet. I pulled out the accordion folder labeled Beach House and spread its contents across my dining table. The original deed, property tax records for 20 years, insurance documents, renovation permits, each piece of paper a breadcrumb in the trail of my life's work. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up my cell phone. I scrolled to Robert's number, hesitated, then set the phone down again. No, confronting him now would only give them time to prepare, to fabricate more lies. I needed to understand exactly what I was facing first. Instead, I called my friend Diane, a retired legal secretary who'd worked for one of the most prestigious law firms in the county for over 30 years. "Eleanor, everything okay?" Diane's voice was warm with concern. We usually saved our calls for arranging our weekly bridge game or book club meetings. Not exactly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight and controlled. "I need a recommendation for a good property lawyer, someone who handles family disputes." There was a pause on the line. "What's happened?" I gave her the condensed version, each word feeling like gravel in my throat. Those ungrateful little... Diane didn't finish the sentence, but her outrage warmed me like a blanket. "Thomas Gallagher. He's who you want. Tough as nails, but fair. Handled my sister's divorce when her ex tried to claim half her inheritance. I'll text you his number." "Thank you, Di." "Eleanor," her voice softened. "Are you alone right now? Do you want me to come over?" The kindness nearly broke my composure. "I'm fine. Really. I just need to make some calls. Call me after. Promise?" "I promise." After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, Thomas's remedy for troubled times, and opened my laptop. I needed to know if Robert had already filed anything regarding the property. North Carolina had public records accessible online, and after some searching, I found the County Register of Deeds website. What I discovered sent ice through my veins. 3 weeks ago, a document had been filed. Transfer of deed, Crawford property. The short description mentioned family transfer and medical necessity. Medical necessity? My hands froze over the keyboard. I dialed Thomas Gallagher's office immediately. His receptionist tried to schedule me for the following week, but when I mentioned potential fraud involving property transfer and elder exploitation, she put me through to him directly. "Mrs. Crawford, I understand this is an urgent situation." His voice was measured, professional. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? I'll be there, I promised, relief washing through me at being taken seriously. That night, I barely slept. Rain pattered against my bedroom window. As I stared at the ceiling, memories washing over me like waves. Robert as a toddler, building sandcastles at the edge of the property. Thomas teaching him to fish off the small dock we'd built together. The Christmas after Thomas died when I found Robert, 16 by then, secretly hanging his father's stocking alongside ours, determined to keep our traditions alive. What had happened to that boy? When had Megan's influence eclipsed the values I thought I'd instilled in him? Morning arrived with clearing skies. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd worn to a neighbor's funeral the previous year, applied light makeup, and twisted my silver hair into a neat bun. Appearances shouldn't matter when fighting for what's rightfully yours, but I knew they did. Thomas Gallagher's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, its interior surprisingly modern despite the historic exterior. The lawyer himself was younger than I expected, perhaps 50, with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes that missed nothing as I laid out my documents on his desk. These are all originals? He asked, examining the deed. Yes. I've kept duplicates in a safety deposit box at First National, but these are the originals. He nodded, scanning the transfer document I'd found online. This is concerning. They're claiming you're medically unfit to maintain the property. I'm 72, Mr. Gallagher, not incapacitated. I live independently, drive myself everywhere, manage my own finances, and until yesterday, believed I was maintaining 2 properties successfully. He allowed himself a small smile. I can see that. What's concerning is this notation about a medical assessment. He tapped the screen. It references an evaluation by a Dr. Patel confirming cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible. I've never seen a Dr. Patel. My physician is Dr. Winters, has been for 15 years. May I? He gestured to my phone, and when I nodded, he made a call. Janet, can you pull anything on file for a Dr. Patel in the county, particularly anyone associated with geriatric or cognitive assessments? He listened, made a note. Thank you. He turned back to me. Mrs. Crawford, what we're looking at appears to be a fraudulent property transfer attempt. They're using falsified medical documentation to claim you're unfit to maintain or make decisions about your property. Can they do that? Not legally, no, and not without consequences. His expression hardened. We're going to file an immediate injunction to halt any property transfer. Then we'll file a civil complaint for attempted fraud. For the first time since standing on my own porch feeling like a stranger, I felt a flicker of hope. What do you need from me? I asked. First, a current medical evaluation from Dr. Winters establishing your cognitive health. Then, evidence of your ongoing involvement with the beach house. Maintenance records, utility payments, anything showing you've been an active owner. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the documents I had at home. And Mrs. Crawford? He added as I gathered my papers. Document everything that happens from now on. Every conversation, every text message. If they contact you, record it if legal, or take detailed notes. Evidence matters. As I left his office, stepping into the spring sunshine, my phone vibrated in my purse. A text message from Robert. Mom, Megan told me you came by the beach house. We need to talk about some changes. Call me when you can. I stared at the screen. At the casual way he referenced changes, as if he weren't trying to steal my home through fraud and deception. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the bank to check my safety deposit box, then to Dr. Winter's office to schedule an immediate cognitive assessment, and finally to the hardware store. Mrs. Crawford, good to see you. Charlie, the owner, greeted me. What can I help you with today? I need new locks, I said, my voice steady and clear. For all the doors at the beach house. That night, rain drummed against my apartment windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea, surrounded by documents, photographs, and memories. The small space felt like a war room, and in many ways, it was. I was preparing for a battle I never imagined fighting against my own son. I opened my journal and began documenting everything that had happened, just as Thomas Gallagher had instructed. The dates, the exact words spoken, the witnesses present. My handwriting, usually flowing and elegant, appeared sharp and precise on the page, as if my anger had transformed even my penmanship. My phone rang just after 9. Robert's name illuminated the screen. I answered with a simple, "Hello, Robert." "Mom." His voice carried that particular tone I'd come to recognize over the years, the one he used when he was trying to sound reasonable while hiding something. "Megan told me you stopped by unexpectedly yesterday." "Yes, I went to tend my garden. At my house." I kept my voice neutral, giving nothing away. He sighed, a theatrical sound. "Look, Mom, we need to talk about the beach house. It's becoming too much for you to manage." "Is it?" I wasn't aware I was struggling. "Mom, be reasonable. You're living in town now. The beach house sits empty most of the time. Megan and I could use it, especially with us thinking about starting a family soon." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Robert and Megan had been thinking about starting a family for the past 3 years whenever they wanted something from me. "I'm curious, Robert. When did you consult with Dr. Patel about my cognitive health?" The silence that followed told me everything. "What are you talking about?" he finally managed, his voice tight. "The medical evaluation you submitted with the property transfer documents. From Dr. Patel, a doctor I've never met." "Mom, you're confused. I think this proves—" "I'm not confused, Robert. I've seen the documents. I know what you and Megan are trying to do." Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened. "We're trying to do what's best for everyone. You're getting older. The beach house is isolated. What if you fall? What if there's another hurricane?" "Your concern is touching," I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "Especially since you visited me exactly twice in the past year. That's not fair. I've been busy with work and—" "Robert," I interrupted, "I don't want to argue. I think we both need some time to think. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling. Slightly. I had given him a chance. A small one, but a chance nonetheless, to be honest, to show remorse. He had chosen deception instead. My phone immediately lit up with his name again. I sent it to voicemail. Then again. After the third call, I turned it off completely. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store to pick up the new locks I'd ordered. Charlie had them ready, along with a recommendation for a reliable locksmith who could install them that day. "Everything all right, Mrs. Crawford?" he asked, concern wrinkling his weathered face. "Just doing some overdue security updates, Charlie," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. By noon, I was parked down the street from my beach house, watching. The 3 cars from yesterday were gone, replaced by only Robert's silver BMW. I waited, my heart pounding uncomfortably in my chest. After 20 minutes, the BMW pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the road toward town. I gave it another 15 minutes, then called the locksmith, who arrived promptly in a white van. I showed him my ID and property deed, which he glanced at politely before getting to work. Within an hour, every lock on the house had been changed. Front door, back door, side entrance, even the cellar doors. "All set, Mrs. Crawford," he said, handing me the new keys. "These are double security locks, much better than what you had before." I thanked him, paid him generously, and waited until his van disappeared before approaching my own front door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, a small but significant victory. Inside of the house felt both familiar and foreign. The furniture had been rearranged, the walls repainted, my personal touches removed or replaced. It was like walking through a distorted memory. The bones were the same, but the flesh had changed. I moved quickly, methodically. First, I took photos of everything, the changes they'd made, the items they'd removed, the state they'd left my home in. Then I went to my bedroom, which had apparently become a guest room. My clothes were gone from the closet, replaced by plastic storage containers labeled "Eleanor's Things" in Megan's handwriting. I opened one to find my clothes haphazardly stuffed inside, many wrinkled beyond repair. Another contained photo albums, their covers bent and pages crumpled. The disrespect stung more than the theft. In the kitchen, I found my recipe box, filled with cards in Thomas's handwriting, my mother's and my own, shoved under the sink beside cleaning supplies. My grandmother's china, which had survived 2 world wars and countless Thanksgiving dinners, was nowhere to be seen. I continued my inventory, documenting everything with my camera and in a small notebook. When I reached the study, Thomas's study, which I'd preserved almost exactly as he left it, I found the door locked. Using my new key, I opened it to find the room completely transformed into a home office for Robert. Thomas's desk was gone, his bookshelves emptied and repainted. Where once hung his diplomas and the maps he loved to collect, now stood sleek, modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a corporate catalog. I stood in the doorway, momentarily paralyzed by the completeness of the erasure. It was as if they'd tried to remove every trace of the life Thomas and I had built, replacing it with their sterile, contemporary vision. Then I saw it. Thomas's antique filing cabinet, shoved into the corner and repurposed as a printer stand. I approached it slowly, running my fingers over the worn oak. Thomas had bought it at an estate sale our first year of marriage, refurbished it himself. It had always been locked, the key kept on his keychain. I knelt down, feeling beneath the bottom drawer for the spare key he'd taped there, a secret he'd shared only with me. To my surprise, it was still there. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. Instead of Thomas's carefully organized files, I found a mess of papers, Robert's papers, bank statements, investment reports, and underneath them all, a manila folder labeled Beach House Transfer. My heart pounding, I opened it. Inside were copies of the fraudulent medical assessment I'd already discovered, but also notes from meetings with a lawyer, drafts of a new will supposedly written by me, and most damning of all, practice. Sheets where someone, Megan, I assumed from the handwriting, had been practicing my signature. I felt sick. This wasn't just opportunistic. It was calculated, premeditated fraud. I took photos of everything, then carefully replaced the documents exactly as I'd found them. There would be time for confrontation later. For now, I needed evidence. The last place I checked was the small closet in the hallway where I kept my sewing supplies and seasonal decorations. The door stuck slightly. It always had. But when I finally pushed it open, I found not only my things in disarray, but also something unexpected. Jewelry boxes. My jewelry boxes, which should have been in my bedroom dresser. I opened the largest one, already knowing what I would find. Empty. The pearls Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary, the sapphire earrings that had been my mother's, the charm bracelet I'd planned to give to Robert's daughter someday. All gone. The theft of the house had been painful. The destruction of Thomas's study had been heartbreaking. But this, the taking of my most personal treasures, items of more sentimental than monetary value, this felt like a violation so profound I could barely breathe. I sank to the floor, clutching the empty jewelry box, allowing myself one moment of grief, just one. Then I dried my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and continued documenting. By the time I left, I had over 100 photos and pages of notes. I locked the front door with my new key, leaving no trace of my visit except for the changed locks, a message they wouldn't miss. As I drove away, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the shocked, hurt mother who had stood on that porch yesterday. Her eyes were clear, her jaw set. She knew exactly what she was fighting for and exactly how to do it. "They stole your jewelry?" Thomas Gallagher's normally composed expression gave way to genuine outrage as I showed him the photos of the empty jewelry boxes. "Yes, family heirlooms mostly. The monetary value isn't exceptional, but..." I trailed off, unable to quantify the emotional worth of those treasures. "But they're yours," he finished for me, "and their theft constitutes a criminal offense, not just a civil matter." We sat in his office the following morning, my evidence spread across his large mahogany desk. The photos, my notes, copies of the fraudulent documents. It all painted a picture so clear it couldn't be dismissed. "Mrs. Crawford, what you've uncovered changes our approach significantly." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "We're not just looking at a contested property transfer anymore. We're looking at identity theft, forgery, elder fraud, and grand larceny. The severity in..." His voice matched the weight I'd been carrying since discovering the extent of the betrayal. "What does that mean for how we proceed?" I asked. "It means we have more options." He began organizing the documents into distinct piles. "We can pursue this as a criminal matter, involving the police from the outset. Or we can use the threat of criminal charges as leverage in a civil case, potentially reaching a settlement that restores your property and possessions without a lengthy court battle." "I don't want a settlement," I said firmly. "I want accountability." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I thought you might say that." He picked up his phone. "Janet, can you come in with the Crawford file? And please call Sheriff Daniels. Tell him I'd like to discuss a potential elder fraud case." While we waited, I sipped the coffee his assistant had brought earlier, now gone cold. My mind wandered to Robert's childhood, his first steps taken on the beach house porch, his high school graduation party in the backyard, the way he'd helped me plant hydrangeas the summer after Thomas died. Had I failed him somehow? Had I missed signs of the man he would become? The door opened and Janet entered with a folder, followed by a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Sheriff James Daniels," Thomas introduced us. "Sheriff, this is Eleanor Crawford." The sheriff shook my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Mrs. Crawford, Mr. Gallagher mentioned your situation briefly on the phone. I'm sorry you're going through this." His sincere tone warmed me. "Thank you, Sheriff." For the next hour, I recounted everything. Finding Megan and her family in my house, the locked doors, the conversation with Robert, discovering the forged documents and stolen jewelry. The sheriff took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening intently. "This is one of the more comprehensive cases of elder exploitation I've seen," he said finally. "Usually, these situations involve a single incident or a series of small thefts. The scope of this, property theft, identity fraud, forgery, is unusual. And the medical fraud," Thomas added. "We've confirmed that Dr. Patel does exist. He's a geriatric specialist in Raleigh, but he's never met Mrs. Crawford, let alone performed a cognitive assessment." Sheriff Daniels nodded grimly. "That adds medical fraud to the list." He turned to me. "Mrs. Crawford, are you prepared to file formal charges against your son and daughter-in-law? I have to warn you, once we begin a criminal investigation, we follow where the evidence leads, regardless of family ties." I thought of the empty jewelry boxes, of Thomas's study stripped bare, of Megan's smug smile as she told me I didn't belong in my own home. Then I thought of Robert as a little boy, holding my hand as we walked along the shoreline. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm prepared." The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork, sworn statements, and planning. By late afternoon, I had filed criminal charges for theft and fraud, secured a temporary restraining order preventing Robert and Megan from selling or transferring any property or assets that might belong to me, and scheduled a formal hearing for the following week. "What happens now?" I asked as Thomas walked me to my car. "Now we wait for them to be served," he replied. "The sheriff will deliver the court orders and criminal complaints tomorrow. Once they're served, they'll be barred from the beach house and required to appear at the hearing next Tuesday." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 days was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "Eleanor," Thomas said gently, using my first name for the first time, "what you're doing takes tremendous courage. Many people in your position would have walked away rather than confront family like this. Walking away would mean giving up everything." "Thomas and I built," I replied. "Not just the house, but the principles we lived by, the values we thought we'd pass to our son." I looked out toward the ocean, barely visible from the parking lot. "I won't let them take that from me, too." He nodded in understanding. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As I drove home, my phone rang. Robert again. "For the first time in 2 days, I answered. "Mom, where are you? I went by your apartment, but you weren't home, and something's wrong with the locks at the beach house. My key isn't working." His voice held no remorse, no recognition of what he'd done, just annoyance at the inconvenience. "I changed the locks," I said simply. "You what? Mom, you can't just—" "I can, Robert. It's my house. This is ridiculous. We need to talk about this like adults. Where are you? I'll come meet you." "We'll talk on Tuesday," I replied. "At the courthouse. Sheriff Daniels will explain everything tomorrow." There was a long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. No longer irritated but bewildered, almost frightened. "Sheriff Daniels? Courthouse? Mom, what have you done?" "What I had to do," I answered, and ended the call. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day on the Carolina coast. I woke early, made my tea, and sat by the window watching the town come to life. Shopkeepers unlocked their doors, joggers passed on the sidewalk below, a garbage truck rumbled down the street. Normal life continuing while mine had been turned upside down. My phone had been silent since my conversation with Robert. I imagined him and Megan huddled together, frantically calling lawyers, trying to understand what was coming. The thought gave me no pleasure, only a deep, aching sadness for what could have been. At precisely 9:30 a.m., my doorbell rang. Sheriff Daniels stood in the hallway, his uniform pressed and official. Good morning, Mrs. Crawford. Just wanted to let you know we're heading to serve the papers now. I thought you might want to be informed of the timeline. His consideration touched me. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that. It's procedure to ask if you'd like to be present when we serve the documents, though I typically advise against it in family situations. I shook my head. No, I don't think that would be helpful. He nodded, seeming relieved. That's probably wise. These situations can get emotional. He hesitated, then added, Mrs. Crawford, I've been in law enforcement for 27 years. I've seen all kinds of family disputes. What I want you to know is that you're doing this exactly right. Legally, properly, with dignity. Many people in your shoes would have taken matters into their own hands in ways that only made their situation worse. His words settled around me like a protective cloak. Thank you, Sheriff. That means a great deal. After he left, I tried to occupy myself with normal activities. Watering my plants, sorting through mail, reading the novel my book club had selected. But my mind kept drifting to the beach house, imagining Sheriff Daniels knocking on the door, Robert's face when he understood what was happening. Around noon, my phone chimed with a text message from Thomas Gallagher. Papers served successfully. We'll call with details later. Simple, professional, yet I felt a wave of relief so intense it made my knees weak. It was real now. There was no going back. I decided to visit Diane. I needed the company of someone who knew me, who understood what this house meant without my having to explain. Diane lived in a charming bungalow 3 blocks from my apartment. When I arrived, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. It happened? She asked as she led me to her sunroom, where she'd already set out tea and shortbread cookies. They were served this morning, I confirmed, sinking into her comfortable wicker chair. Good. She poured tea with the precise movements of someone performing a ritual. Now tell me everything. I recounted the events of the past few days, the changed locks, the evidence I'd gathered, the criminal charges filed. Diane listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from outrage to pride. Eleanor Crawford, she said when I finished, you are the strongest woman I know. I laughed softly. I don't feel strong, I searched for the right word. Hollowed out. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's because you're grieving. Not just for the things they tried to take, but for the relationship you thought you had with your son. Her perception struck me like a physical blow. She was right. Beneath the anger and determination was a deep, profound grief for the son I thought I knew. What if I'm making a mistake, Di? I whispered, voicing the doubt that had been haunting me. What if this destroys any chance of reconciliation? Honey, they were practicing forging your signature, she said gently but firmly. They were planning to declare you mentally incompetent. They stole your jewelry and erased your husband's study. There wasn't going to be a reconciliation. They were planning to erase you. Her words were harsh but true. I nodded, blinking back tears. Besides, she continued, real reconciliation can't happen without truth and accountability. Maybe, someday, after all this is settled, there might be a path back to some kind of relationship. But it would have to be built on honest ground, not on the quicksand they were creating. We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping our tea, watching the birds in her garden. Eventually my phone rang. Thomas Gallagher. Mrs. Crawford, he greeted me. I wanted to update you on this morning's events. Please do, I said, putting the call on speaker so Diane could hear. Sheriff Daniels served the papers to both Robert and Megan at the beach house around 10:30 a.m. According to his report, there were several other adults present, presumably Megan's family members. Robert initially refused to accept the documents, but the sheriff explained that refusal doesn't prevent service from being legally completed. I could picture the scene, the shock on their faces, the sudden realization that their plans had been discovered. What happened then? I asked. There was apparently quite a scene. Megan became verbally aggressive, accusing the sheriff of harassment. One of the other women, described as similar in appearance to Megan, likely her sister, attempted to record the interaction on her phone, which the sheriff advised against as it could potentially be used as evidence of harassment. Diane raised her eyebrows, mouthing, "Typical," at me. And Robert? I asked, dreading the answer. Thomas hesitated. Robert was more subdued. According to the sheriff, after reading the documents, he asked if you were behind this. When the sheriff confirmed you had filed the charges, Robert said, and I quote, She doesn't understand what she's doing. Still believing I was incapable. Still dismissing me. The pain was sharp, but clarifying. The sheriff then explained that they have until 5 p.m. today to vacate the property, after which time their presence would constitute trespassing. He'll conduct a follow-up visit this evening to ensure compliance. Thank you for the update, I said. What happens next? They'll likely retain counsel immediately. Expect contact from their attorney within 24 to 48 hours. In the meantime, we'll proceed with the hearing preparations. The temporary restraining order prevents them from disposing of any assets that might belong to you, including selling or transferring the house. After we ended the call, Diane refilled our teacups. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. Relieved, sad, but mostly resolved. Like I've finally stopped a wound from bleeding so it can start to heal. She nodded. That's a good way to put it. By sunset, I received another text from Thomas. Sheriff confirms property vacated. All clear. That night, I slept better than I had in days, wrapped in the certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The pain hadn't disappeared. Perhaps it never would, but it had transformed into something manageable, something I could carry without being crushed beneath its weight. The next morning, I drove to the beach. House. My beach house, as the sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The driveway was empty, the windows dark. I unlocked the front door with my new key and stepped inside. The house smelled different. Perfume I didn't wear, food I didn't cook. But beneath those unfamiliar scents was the underlying essence of home. Salt air, old wood, memories. I moved through the rooms, slowly, assessing the damage, making mental notes of what needed to be restored, what could be replaced, what was irretrievably lost. Thomas's study would need the most work, bringing back his desk, his books, the maps he'd lovingly collected over decades. The kitchen would need a thorough cleaning. The bedrooms would need fresh linens, familiar touches. In the living room, I found a framed photograph lying face down on the mantel, as if it had been knocked over in haste. I picked it up, turned it over. It was a picture of Robert and me, taken the day he graduated college. We stood arm in arm, both smiling widely, the future bright and unmarred before us. I traced his face with my fingertip, this stranger who was my son, wondering where we had lost each other along the way. Then I placed the photograph back on the mantel, facing forward. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't erase him the way he had tried to erase me. The days leading up to the hearing passed in a flurry of preparation. Thomas Gallagher and I met several times, reviewing evidence, practicing potential testimony, preparing for various scenarios. Dr. Winters conducted a thorough cognitive assessment. The results, of which were unequivocal. I was of sound mind, with no indications of dementia or any other cognitive impairment. Actually, Dr. Winters had said with a small smile, your cognitive functions test above average for your age group. Your memory recall is exceptional. I'd smiled back. A lifetime of remembering where I put things without a husband to ask. Robert made no attempt to contact me, though Thomas informed me his lawyer had reached out seeking a settlement. They're offering to return the jewelry and withdraw the property transfer application, Thomas told me over the phone. In exchange, they want you to drop the criminal charges. No, I said without hesitation. This isn't about getting my things back. It's about accountability. The morning of the hearing arrived with unexpected calm. I dressed carefully in a powder blue suit that Thomas had always said brought out my eyes, pearl earrings, not the stolen ones, but a simpler pair, and low heels. Diane arrived to drive me to the courthouse, insisting I shouldn't face this day alone. You look like you're going to a luncheon, not a legal battle, she commented as I got into her car. My mother always said to dress for the occasion you want, not the one you have, I replied, smoothing my skirt. Besides, appearances matter in these situations. The county courthouse was an imposing brick building in the center of town, its steps worn smooth by generations of feet. Thomas Gallagher met us at the entrance, professional and reassuring in his dark suit. Ready, Mrs. Crawford? I nodded, as I'll ever be. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, the wood paneling giving it a solemn, traditional atmosphere. Sheriff Daniels nodded respectfully as we passed. Several other people were already seated, court staff, a few curious onlookers, and in the front row, a petite woman with a notebook who I assumed was a reporter from the local paper. Then I saw them. Robert and Megan sat at a table on the opposite side of the room, heads bent close together, whispering. Beside them was a man in an expensive-looking suit. Their lawyer, presumably. Megan's sister Veronica sat directly behind them, her face set in a scowl. Robert looked up as we entered, his eyes meeting mine briefly before darting away. He looked tired, I noticed, with dark circles under his eyes and his normally neat hair, slightly disheveled. For a moment, maternal instinct surged within me, the urge to go to him, to smooth his hair, to make everything better as I had when he was small. I suppressed it firmly. That boy was gone, if he had ever truly existed. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Martinez entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair, took her seat and surveyed the room with practiced efficiency. "Be seated. Crawford versus Crawford, case number 2024 CV 187. This is a hearing regarding allegations of elder fraud, property theft, and identity forgery." She looked over her glasses at the attorneys. "Counselors, your appearances for the record." Thomas stood. "Thomas Gallagher representing the plaintiff, Eleanor Crawford, Your Honor." The other lawyer rose. "Jonathan Reeves for the defendants, Robert and Megan Crawford." Judge Martinez nodded. "Mr. Gallagher, as this is your motion, you may proceed." For the next hour, Thomas presented our case methodically and compellingly. He showed the court the fraudulent medical assessment, the forged signatures, photographs of the empty jewelry boxes, and Thomas's transformed study. Joe called Dr. Winters to testify about my excellent cognitive health, and Sheriff Daniels to describe the condition of the beach house when he served the papers. Throughout it all, I sat straight-backed and attentive, my gaze occasionally meeting Robert's across the room. Each time, he looked away first. Finally, Thomas called me to the witness stand. As I was sworn in, I noticed a slight tremor in my right hand, the only outward sign of the emotional storm within me. "Mrs. Crawford," Thomas began gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with the beach house at 1742 Osprey Lane." I took a deep breath. My late husband Thomas and I purchased the land in 1978 when we were just starting out. We built the house ourselves, room by room, as we could afford it. After Thomas passed, away from cancer in 2004, I continued living there full-time until about 3 years ago, when I decided to get an apartment in town for the winter months. But the beach house remained my primary residence during spring and summer. And the personal items in the house, the furniture, jewelry, and so forth, who owns those items? I do. Everything in that house was either purchased by my husband and me during our marriage, inherited from our families, or acquired by me after his death. Thomas nodded. "Mrs. Crawford, when did you first become aware that your son and daughter-in-law were attempting to take possession of your property?" I recounted finding them at the house, being locked out, discovering the forged documents. My voice remained steady, even as I described the empty jewelry, boxes, and Thomas's desecrated study. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," Thomas said when I finished. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Martinez looked to the defense table. "Mr. Reeves, your cross-examination." Robert's lawyer approached the stand with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Crawford, first let me say how difficult this must be for you. Family disputes are always painful." I nodded but said nothing. "Mrs. Crawford, isn't it true that your son has been helping maintain the beach house for several years now? Paying for repairs, lawn care, and so forth?" "Robert has occasionally arranged for repairs, yes. But I've always reimbursed him." He looked skeptical. "Always? Every time?" "Yes. I'm very particular about maintaining my financial independence." He changed tactics. "Mrs. Crawford, when was the last time you stayed at the beach house for more than a week?" "Last summer. I spent June through August there." "And since then?" "I visited regularly for weekends, weather permitting. I was there just 2 weeks ago to check on storm damage to the roof." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Mrs. Crawford, have you and your son ever discussed the eventual inheritance of the beach house?" "Objection," Thomas interrupted. "Irrelevant to the current proceedings, which concern fraudulent actions, not inheritance plans." "I'll allow it," Judge Martinez said. "The witness may answer." I met the lawyer's gaze directly. "Yes, we have. I've always been clear that the beach house would eventually go to Robert upon my death. That's reflected in my will, which has been unchanged since 2010. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, clearly not the answer he had expected. "If that's the case, Mrs. Crawford, why do you think your son would attempt to, as you claim, take the property fraudulently when he would eventually inherit it anyway?" I glanced at Robert, who was staring fixedly at the table in front of him. I believe my daughter-in-law became impatient, and perhaps they thought I wouldn't notice or fight back. The lawyer's smile tightened. No further questions, Your Honor. As I returned to my seat beside Thomas, Judge Martinez called a 15-minute recess. The tension in the courtroom had become almost palpable, like the heavy air before a summer storm. In the hallway outside, Diane handed me a bottle of, water. You're doing beautifully, she whispered, dignified but strong. Thomas joined us, his expression cautiously optimistic. The judge seems receptive to our evidence. Robert's lawyer is trying to paint this as a misunderstanding, but the documentation speaks for itself. What happens next? I asked, sipping the water. They'll present their defense. Based on their line of questioning, I suspect they'll try to suggest you've been neglecting the property and that Robert was merely stepping in to protect a family asset. I shook my head. That won't explain the forged medical assessment or the stolen jewelry. Exactly. His confident smile reassured me. Stay steady. We're on solid ground here. When court resumed, Mr. Reeves called Robert to the stand. My son walked forward with, the slightly stiff gait I recognized from his childhood, the way he moved when he was nervous but trying to hide it. As he was sworn in, his eyes briefly met mine, then darted away. Mr. Crawford, his lawyer began, please describe your relationship with your mother. Robert cleared his throat. We've always been close. After my father died, it was just the two of us. I helped her through her grief, and she put me through college. We've had a good relationship. And the beach house, what significance does it hold for you? A nostalgic smile softened Robert's features. It's been the center of our family life. Dad and Mom built it together. I learned to swim in that ocean, had my high school graduation party in that backyard. It's home. When did you begin to notice changes in your mother's ability to maintain the property? Robert shifted uncomfortably. About 3 years ago. The winters are harsh on the coast, and she seemed overwhelmed by the constant maintenance. She agreed to get the apartment in town, which I thought was a good compromise. Yet you continued to be concerned? He nodded. The house was empty most of the time, but still needed upkeep. I found myself driving down more frequently to check on things, fixing leaks, dealing with storm damage, arranging for lawn care. Did your mother reimburse you for these expenses? Sometimes, Robert admitted, but often she'd forget, or I wouldn't mention smaller expenses to avoid worrying her. My hands clenched in my lap. The subtle implications of forgetfulness, of needing protection from worry. He was laying groundwork for the competency narrative. Mr. Crawford, why did you consult with Dr. Patel regarding your mother's cognitive health? Here it came, the heart of their defense. Robert looked directly at me for the first time. Mom, I was worried about you. You seemed increasingly forgetful, confused about dates, misplacing things. When you left the stove on during my visit last Thanksgiving, I became genuinely concerned for your safety. I stared back, stunned. The Thanksgiving incident had happened, but it had been Megan who left the stove on while helping prepare dinner, something I gently pointed out at the time. Dr. Patel is a respected geriatric specialist, Robert continued. I described Mom's symptoms, and he suggested she might be experiencing early cognitive decline. He provided an initial assessment based on my observations, recommending a full evaluation. Objection, Thomas called sharply. The witness is testifying about medical opinions from a doctor who never examined Mrs. Crawford, and who is not present to be cross-examined. Sustained, Judge Martinez ruled. Mr. Reeves, keep your questions to facts within the witness's direct knowledge. Robert's lawyer nodded. Mr. Crawford, what was your intention regarding the beach house property? To protect it. For Mom. For our family's future. Robert's voice grew earnest. The property values in that area have skyrocketed. Developers have been buying up old beach houses, tearing them down for luxury condos. I wanted to ensure the house stayed in our family, that Mom's asset was protected if her condition deteriorated. And the property transfer documents? They were meant to be a safety measure, not a permanent change. I never intended to take the house from Mom, just to ensure it couldn't be sold out from under her if her judgment became impaired. The calculated half-truths made my blood simmer. There had been no developers, no threats to the property. And safety measure hardly, explained the forged signatures, the practiced handwriting. No further questions, Your Honor, Mr. Reeves said, returning to his seat. Thomas rose for cross-examination, his expression unreadable. Mr. Crawford, you've painted a touching picture of concern for your mother. Let's examine that concern more closely. He walked to our table and picked up a document. This is your mother's credit card. Statement from March of this year. Can you explain the charge of $12,700 to Coastal Renovations? Robert blinked rapidly. That would be for the kitchen remodel at the beach house. A remodel your mother never approved or was consulted about, correct? She mentioned wanting to update the kitchen eventually. I thought I'd surprise her. Thomas raised an eyebrow. A $12,700 surprise on her. Credit card. How thoughtful. He picked up another document. And this charge to Bay Area Furnishings for $8,400? Robert swallowed visibly. New living room furniture. The old pieces were showing their age. Including your father's armchair? The one your mother specifically mentioned wanting to preserve? It was threadbare, Robert mumbled. Thomas nodded, as if Robert had made his point for him. Let's move on to Dr. Patel. You testified that he provided an initial assessment based on your description of your mother's symptoms. Did you ever bring your mother to see Dr. Patel in person? No, but yes or no, Mr. Crawford? No. Did you inform your mother that you were discussing her cognitive health with a doctor she had never met? No. Did you have medical power of attorney? Or any other legal right to obtain medical opinions about your mother without her knowledge or consent? Robert's jaw tightened. No. Thomas approached the witness stand, his voice dropping slightly. Mr. Crawford, if your intention was merely to protect the beach house as a family asset, why were your wife's family members occupying it without your mother's knowledge or permission? They were just visiting for the weekend. A weekend during which they had removed or replaced your mother's personal belongings, rearranged furniture, redecorated, and effectively moved in. That seems like more than a casual visit. Robert's gaze dropped to his hands. It wasn't what it looked like. One final question, Mr. Crawford. Thomas's voice grew even quieter, forcing everyone to listen carefully. If this was all an unfortunate misunderstanding stemming from genuine concern, how do you explain the missing jewelry? The pearl necklace, the sapphire earrings, the charm bracelet, items of significant sentimental value to your mother that disappeared from her bedroom? The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over her machine. Robert's face had gone pale. I don't know anything about missing jewelry. You don't know or you don't remember taking them? Thomas pressed. Objection. Mr. Reeves stood. Counsel is badgering the witness. Withdrawn, Thomas said smoothly. No further questions, Your Honor. As Robert returned to his seat, his shoulders slumped, I caught Megan shooting him a look of pure venom. The division between them was becoming visible. Cracks. In a united front. Mr. Reeves called Megan to the stand next. Where Robert had appeared nervous and defensive, Megan was composed, almost rehearsed. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, a picture of demure concern. Mrs. Crawford, Mr. Reeves began, how would you describe your relationship with your mother-in-law? We've always been close, Megan replied, her voice warm with manufactured sincerity. Eleanor has been like a mother to me since Robert and I married. I've tried to be a supportive daughter-in-law, especially as she's gotten older. Can you describe the events of the day Eleanor arrived at the beach house unexpectedly? Megan's expression shifted to one of confused hurt. It was so strange. We were having a small family gathering. My parents were visiting from Ohio, and my sister and her children came down for the weekend. Eleanor arrived without calling first, which was unusual. She seemed disoriented, almost hostile. When I suggested she might be more comfortable coming back another time, she became fixated on working in the garden. The lies flowed so smoothly I almost admired her skill. I was concerned for her safety, using garden shears in, that agitated state, so I suggested we talk inside first. She refused and became increasingly upset. Eventually, she left abruptly. I called Robert immediately, worried about her driving in that condition. And the property transfer documents? What was your understanding of those? Megan's eyes widened with innocence. Robert explained they were a protective measure, ensuring the beach house would remain in the family, regardless of Eleanor's health status. It was never about taking anything away from her, only about preserving a legacy. Mr. Reeves nodded sympathetically. And regarding the allegations of stolen jewelry? I'm devastated by those accusations, Megan said, her voice catching slightly. I would never take Eleanor's precious mementos. I have no idea what happened to those items, but I wonder if, in her confusion, she might have misplaced them herself. It wouldn't be the first time she's forgotten where she put something important. The performance was flawless, concerned, reasonable, slightly wounded. If I hadn't lived through her contemptuous dismissal on my own porch, I might almost have believed her myself. No further questions, Mr. Reeves concluded. Thomas approached for cross-examination, holding a small stack of papers. Mrs. Crawford, you testified that you and Eleanor have always been close. How often did you visit her at her apartment in town during the past year? Megan hesitated. I'm not sure of the exact number. Would you say more than 10 times? 5 times? Once? Perhaps 3 or 4 times, she said, her confidence wavering. Phone. Calls? How often did you call to check on this woman who was like a mother to you? I don't keep track of every call, Mr. Gallagher. Fortunately, phone records do. He handed her a document. This is Eleanor's phone log for the past 6 months. How many incoming calls do you see from your number? Megan scanned the page, her lips tightening. 2. 2 calls in 6 months. That's your definition of close? She lifted her chin defiantly. We communicate through Robert. I see. Thomas took back the document. Let's discuss the day Eleanor found you at the beach house. You testified she arrived without calling first. Was she required to call before visiting her own property? Of course not, but... And you described her as disoriented and hostile. Can you provide specific examples of this disorientation? Megan shifted uncomfortably. She seemed confused about why we were there. Perhaps because you were occupying her house without permission. Objection, Mr. Reeves interjected. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Martinez ruled. Thomas continued undeterred. Mrs. Crawford, you mentioned being concerned for Eleanor's safety with garden shears. Have you, ever, in your 5 years of knowing her, witnessed Eleanor injure herself while gardening? No, but, in fact, hasn't she maintained that garden meticulously for decades without incident? I suppose so. Thomas nodded, then shifted gears abruptly. Mrs. Crawford, do you own a pearl necklace? The question visibly startled her. Yes, I have a pearl necklace. When did you acquire it? I don't remember exactly. A few years ago. Thomas approached the evidence table and picked up a photograph. This is a picture from Eleanor's jewelry box, showing a distinctive pearl necklace with an unusual diamond-shaped clasp. Have you seen this necklace before? Megan's composure began to crack. It looks similar to mine, but pearls often look alike. Indeed they do. Thomas nodded to the bailiff, who handed him a small evidence bag. Your Honor, this is a pearl necklace recovered from the defendant's residence during the execution of the search warrant. May I approach the witness? The judge nodded, and Thomas placed the bag in front of Megan. Mrs. Crawford, is this the pearl necklace you own? Megan stared at it, her face draining of color. It appears to be. Could you read the inscription on the clasp, please? With visibly trembling fingers, Megan turned over the clasp. Her voice was barely audible as she read, To Eleanor, all my love, Thomas, June 12th, 1984. The courtroom remained utterly silent. The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the soft sound of Judge Martinez's pen scratching against her notepad. Megan sat frozen, the evidence bag containing my pearl necklace still in front of her, her carefully constructed facade crumbling visibly. Thomas continued, his voice gentle but relentless. Mrs. Crawford, can you explain how you came to possess a necklace with an inscription clearly indicating it belonged to Eleanor? Megan's eyes darted to Robert, who stared back with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Shock, perhaps, or dawning horror. I thought Robert had bought it for me, she stammered. Did he tell you that? Not exactly. He gave me a jewelry box with several pieces in it. He said they were gifts. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. And when was this? About 3 months ago. Did you find it unusual that your husband would give you multiple pieces of jewelry at once, outside of a special occasion? Megan's lips pressed into a thin line. Robert is generous. I didn't question it. Thomas turned toward the defense table. Your Honor, at this time I'd like to introduce Exhibit D, the inventory of items recovered from the defendant's residence during the execution of the search warrant. The bailiff distributed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. Thomas continued, Mrs. Crawford, this inventory lists not only the pearl necklace you're currently examining, but also sapphire earrings, a silver charm bracelet, and several other pieces of jewelry identified by Eleanor Crawford as her personal property. All of these items were found in your bedroom dresser. How do you explain their presence there? Megan's composure shattered completely. Robert told me Eleanor wanted me to have them. He said she was downsizing, that she'd specifically chosen pieces for me to inherit early. Her voice had risen to a near shout, her perfect poise abandoned. Robert stood abruptly. "That's not true. I never said that." "Order," Judge Martinez commanded, striking her gavel once. "Mr. Crawford, sit down immediately. You'll have an opportunity to respond when called upon." Robert sank back into his chair, his face ashen. Thomas turned back to Megan. "So to clarify your testimony, you're now stating that these items were given to you by Robert, who represented them as gifts from Eleanor." "Yes," Megan insisted, her eyes bright with unshed tears of frustration. "I would never have taken them otherwise." Yet Eleanor testified she never gave permission for these items to be removed from her house, much less gifted to you. "One of you is lying, Mrs. Crawford." "Objection," Mr. Reeves called. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Judge Martinez ruled. "Mr. Gallagher, keep to questions rather than accusations." Thomas nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Crawford, were you aware that the property transfer documents submitted to the county included forms indicating Eleanor was mentally incompetent to manage her affairs?" "Robert handled all of that," Megan said quickly. "I just signed where he told me to." "Did you practice writing Eleanor's signature?" Her eyes widened. "No, of course not." Thomas approached with another evidence bag. "This was found in your home office. A sheet of paper with multiple attempts at Eleanor's signature. Is this your handwriting?" Megan stared at the evidence, then looked desperately toward Robert. I thought we might need to sign something for her if she became unable." Robert said it would be okay. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Martinez struck her gavel again. "Order." Thomas waited until silence returned. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Megan returned to her seat, she and Robert exchanged whispered words that quickly escalated to hissed accusations. Mr. Reeves placed a restraining hand on Robert's arm, whispering urgently to both of them. Judge Martinez observed the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Mr. Reeves, do you wish to call any additional witnesses?" The defense attorney stood, clearly reassessing his strategy. "No, Your Honor. The defense rests." "Very well, we'll take a 30-minute recess, after which I'll hear closing arguments." In the hallway, Thomas looked pleased but cautious. That went better than expected. The jewelry evidence was particularly damning, and they're clearly turning on each other. "I never thought Robert would steal from me," I said quietly. "The property transfer, even the forged documents, those I could almost understand as misguided concern, twisted by Megan's influence. But taking my jewelry, Thomas's things—" Diane squeezed my hand. "Sometimes people reveal who they truly are when they think no one's watching." When court resumed, Thomas delivered a concise, powerful closing argument, emphasizing the clear evidence of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Mr. Reeves attempted to salvage what he could, suggesting that while mistakes had been made, there had been no malicious intent, merely miscommunication and poor judgment. Judge Martinez listened attentively to both, then addressed the courtroom. "This case presents a troubling example of elder exploitation within a family context. The evidence clearly establishes that the defendants attempted to fraudulently obtain Mrs. Eleanor Crawford's property through deception, including forged medical documentation and signatures. Furthermore, personal property belonging to Mrs. Crawford was removed from her residence without permission and found in the defendant's possession." She turned her stern gaze directly to Robert and Megan. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. The defendants are prohibited from entering the property at 1742 Osprey Lane without the plaintiff's express written permission. All personal property identified in the inventory shall be returned to Mrs. Crawford immediately." A wave of relief washed over me, not triumph, but the quieter satisfaction of truth recognized. "Additionally," Judge Martinez continued, "the court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of fraud, forgery, and theft. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Crawford, I strongly suggest you consult with criminal defense attorneys." She paused, then added with unmistakable disgust, "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many family disputes over property and inheritance. But the calculated nature of this attempt, complete with forged medical documents declaring a clearly competent woman incapacitated, is among the most disturbing. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with finality. As people began to rise and gather their belongings, I remained seated, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what had just occurred. We had won, completely and unequivocally. My home was secure, my possessions would be returned, and Robert and Megan would face consequences for their actions. Yet, there was no joy in it, only a profound sadness for what had been irrevocably lost. Trust, family bonds, the possibility of reconciliation. As Thomas gathered our documents, I noticed Robert approaching our table. Thomas tensed, but I placed a restraining hand on his arm. "It's all right," I said softly. "I'll speak with him." Robert stood before me, his expression a complex mixture of shame, defiance, and something like grief. "Mom," he began, his voice barely audible, "I never meant for it to go this far." I regarded him steadily. Which part? The forged documents? The stolen jewelry? Or locking me out of my own home? He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Megan said, she convinced me you were slipping, that we needed to protect the property before you made poor decisions. The jewelry, I never told her to take it. I didn't know until today. You gave her my things," I said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. I don't know what I thought anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that my heart ached despite everything. "Can we talk? Privately? Maybe tomorrow, when things have calmed down?" I considered him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt the full weight of what had been broken between us. Not just trust, but the fundamental bond of parent and child. "Not tomorrow," I said finally. "I need time, Robert. What you and Megan tried to do, it can't be undone with one conversation." His face fell, but he nodded. "I understand, but Mom, please believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." "Intentions matter less than actions," I replied, rising from my seat. "You were willing to have me declared incompetent, to erase me from my own life, for the sake of a house. That's something I need to come to terms with in my own time." He didn't try to stop me as I walked away, Thomas and Diane flanking me protectively as we exited the courtroom. Outside, the spring sunshine seemed almost offensively bright, the world continuing its normal rhythms despite the seismic shift in my personal landscape. "What now?" Diane asked gently as we stood on the courthouse steps. I took a deep breath of salt-tinged air. Now I go home, my home, and I begin again. The days following the court hearing unfolded with a strange mixture of vindication and grief. I returned to the beach house the very next morning, armed with cleaning supplies, fresh linens, and a determination to reclaim what was mine, not just physically, but emotionally. Sheriff Daniels personally supervised the return of my stolen possessions 3 days after the hearing. He arrived in his patrol car, followed by another officer carrying several carefully labeled evidence boxes. "Mrs. Crawford," he greeted me with a respectful nod. "We've recovered all items listed in the inventory. They've been processed as evidence, but the DA has released them back to you since there's no dispute about ownership." I invited them in, watching with a complex tangle of emotions as they placed the boxes on my dining room table, the same table where Thomas and I had shared countless meals, where Robert had done his homework, where life had unfolded in its ordinary, precious ways. "Everything seems to be accounted for," the sheriff continued, consulting his clipboard. "The pearl necklace, sapphire earrings, charm bracelet, and other jewelry items. Also some personal documents that were removed from your study." I thanked him, signing the necessary forms with a steady hand. After they left, I stood alone in the silent house, staring at the unopened boxes. They contained more than just jewelry and papers. They held memories, connections to a past that had once seemed secure and now felt fragile. Slowly, I opened the first box and lifted out the pearl necklace. Thomas had given it to me on our 20th anniversary, fastening it around my neck with fingers rough from carpentry, but gentle in their touch. "To match." "The light in your eyes," he'd said. I held it to the window, watching sunlight play across the iridescent surface of each pearl. Then, decisively, I fastened it around my neck where it belonged. One by one, I reclaimed each item, placing the sapphire earrings in my jewelry box, returning the charm bracelet to my dresser drawer, sorting through the documents and photographs that had been removed from Thomas's study. The process of restoration continued for weeks. I hired carpenters to rebuild Thomas's desk according to the original design, using photographs as a guide. I scoured antique shops for books similar to those that had been discarded, reframed family photographs, and planted new hydrangeas to replace those that had been neglected. Diane visited often, bringing casseroles and companionship. "You're rebuilding more than a house," she observed one afternoon as we sat on the porch swing. You're rebuilding yourself. Her words resonated deeply. In fighting for my property, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had gradually receded after Thomas's death. My strength, my independence, my voice. Thomas Gallagher called regularly with updates on the legal aftermath. The district attorney had charged both Robert and Megan with fraud and theft, but offered a plea agreement that included restitution, community service, and probation rather than jail time. They've accepted the plea, he informed me during one such call. They'll each pay a fine of $10,000, complete 200 hours of community service, and remain on probation for 2 years. Most importantly, there will be a permanent restraining order preventing them from coming within 500 feet of your property without written permission. And Megan's sister? I asked, remembering Veronica's sneering face. No charges against her, but she was named as a witness in the case. I doubt she'll be showing up at family gatherings anytime soon. I thanked him for the update, feeling a curious emptiness where I had expected satisfaction. Justice had been served, but it brought no joy, only confirmation that something precious had been irretrievably broken. On a warm afternoon in late May, about a month after the hearing, I was pruning roses in the garden when a car pulled into my driveway. For a moment, my heart clenched with anxiety. Then I recognized Dr. Winters stepping out with a small potted plant in her hands. "Hope I'm not intruding," she called as she approached the garden gate. I was driving by and thought I'd check on my favorite patient. I welcomed her with genuine pleasure, inviting her onto the porch for iced tea. "This is a peace lily," she said, placing the plant on the small table between us. "They're resilient, thrive even in difficult conditions. Like some people we know, i.e., suggested with a small smile. She laughed softly. "Exactly like some people I know." Her expression grew more serious. "Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask how you're really doing. Medically, you're in excellent health, but what you've been through, it takes a toll." I considered her question carefully, watching a pair of pelicans glide over the water in perfect formation. "I'm all right," I said. Finally. Not unscathed, but all right. The hardest part is reconciling the son I thought I knew with the man who was willing to have me declared incompetent for financial gain. "Have you had any contact with him since the hearing?" I shook my head. "He's called several times, left messages asking to meet. I'm not ready." "That's perfectly understandable," she assured me. Betrayal of that magnitude requires time to process. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping our tea and listening to the rhythm of waves against the shore. Then she asked, "What are your plans now? For the house? For yourself?" It was a question I'd been contemplating deeply. "I'm staying here permanently," I said with newfound certainty. "I've already given notice on my apartment in town. This is where I belong." "And long term?" I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. "I've been talking with a lawyer about establishing a trust. When I'm gone, this house will become a retreat center for single parents and their children, a place where they can experience the healing power of the ocean, just as Thomas and I did, as Robert did when he was young." Dr. Winters nodded, approvingly. "A beautiful legacy. It won't erase what happened," I acknowledged, "but it gives meaning to the struggle. This house was built with love. It should continue to shelter love long after I'm gone." The following week brought an unexpected letter, not from Robert, but from Megan. I recognized her precise handwriting on the envelope and nearly discarded it unopened. Curiosity prevailed, however, and I took it to the porch swing to read in the fading afternoon light. "Dear Eleanor," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't insult you by asking for it. What I did, was unforgivable. But I want you to know the truth." What followed was a confession that, while self-serving in parts, provided missing pieces to the puzzle. Megan had indeed been the driving force behind the scheme, initially suggesting to Robert that they should help manage the beach house, gradually escalating to the fraudulent property transfer. "Robert resisted the more extreme measures," she wrote. "The forged medical assessment was my idea. I was the one who practiced your signature. I took your jewelry because I believed we were entitled to it, that you had everything while we, struggled with student loans and a mortgage. I was wrong, terribly wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life living with that knowledge." She closed with news that she and Robert had separated. She had moved back to Ohio to live with her parents while he remained in their apartment, both of them working to pay the court-ordered restitution. "He loves you," she concluded, "more than I understood. Whatever you decide about your relationship with him going forward, Please know that he was a better son than I allowed him to be a husband. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, uncertain how to feel about this unexpected perspective. It neither absolved Robert nor fully condemned him. It simply added complexity to an already complicated situation. That night, I dreamed of Thomas. We were walking along the shoreline as we had countless times during our marriage, his hand warm and solid in mine. "What would you do?" I asked him in the peculiar logic of dreams, where conversations need no context. He smiled, that crooked, thoughtful smile I missed every day. I'd remember that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about choosing not to let it consume you. I woke with tears on my cheeks and his voice echoing in my mind. The dream offered no simple answers, but it reminded me of a fundamental truth. Healing comes not from erasing pain, but from integrating it into a larger story, one that includes both betrayal and beauty, loss and renewal. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called Robert. When his voicemail answered, I left a brief message. "This is your mother. I'm ready to talk. Not to forget, not to excuse, but to understand. Sunday afternoon at 2, if you're willing." Then I went to the garden and began planting new seeds in soil made richer by seasons of growth and decay, a fitting metaphor for the work of rebuilding that lay ahead. Sunday arrived with a sky so intensely blue it seemed almost artificial, the kind of perfect coastal day that had drawn Thomas and me to this spot nearly half a century ago. I spent the morning in purposeful activity, baking an apple pie from scratch using my mother's recipe, arranging fresh-cut hydrangeas on the dining table, vacuuming the already clean living room. Diane had offered to be present during Robert's visit, a silent ally in the background, but I had declined. Whatever happened between my son and me needed to happen without witnesses or buffers. At precisely 1:55 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Robert emerge, pausing to straighten his shirt and smooth his hair. Nervous gestures that reminded me suddenly, painfully, of the little boy who had once been so eager to please. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. I took a deep breath, smoothed my own hair in unconscious echo of his gesture, and opened the door. Robert stood on the porch, a small potted plant in his hands, uncertainty etched across his features. He looked thinner than at the hearing, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mom," he said simply. "Robert." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." He entered, hesitantly, as if crossing a threshold into foreign territory rather than the home where he had spent his childhood. His eyes moved around the living room, taking in the restored furniture, the family photographs returned to their proper places, the subtle but unmistakable reclaiming of space. "You fixed everything," he observed quietly. "Not everything," I replied. "Some things can't be fixed, only acknowledged, and perhaps in time, understood." He nodded, then extended the plant toward me, a small lemon tree in a terracotta pot. "I remembered how you and Dad always talked about planting citrus trees, but worried they wouldn't survive the coastal winters." "This variety might," I said, accepting the gift. "It's bred for cooler climates." The exchange felt stilted, formal, too. Strangers performing the rituals of politeness. I gestured toward the dining room. "I've made coffee and pie." We settled at the table, the familiar domestic scene at odds with the emotional chasm between us. I served the pie, poured the coffee, and waited. Robert stared into his cup for a long moment before speaking. "I don't know where to begin." "The truth would be a good start," I suggested, keeping my voice gentle despite the firmness of the words. He nodded, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "The truth." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong. Terribly, inexcusably wrong. I let Megan convince me that we deserved this house more than you did, that you were becoming incapable of managing it. And once we started down that path, each step seemed to lead inevitably to the next. You could have stopped at any point," I observed. "You could have told the truth." "I know." His eyes met mine directly for the first time. "I was a coward and greedy. The idea of having this place, this beautiful, valuable property, without having to wait." He shook his head. "It sounds horrible saying it out loud." "It was horrible," I confirmed, not sparing him the reality of what he had done. Not just the attempt to take the house, Robert, but the violation of trust. The willingness to have me declared incompetent, to erase your father's study, to take the jewelry he gave me. "I never intended for her to take the jewelry," he insisted, a flash of the defensiveness I'd seen in court returning briefly. Then he seemed to catch himself. But I knew about it afterward. I didn't stop her or make her return it. And I did help her redecorate. Remove your things. His voice trailed off, the full weight of his actions seemingly hitting him anew. Why? I asked the question that had haunted me for months. We were close once. I thought I had raised you to be honest, to value family over possessions. He was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. After Dad died, I felt this enormous pressure to succeed, to make something of myself that would have made him proud. Then I met Megan, whose family had everything. Summer homes, trust funds, connections. I wanted to give her that kind of life, to prove I wasn't just some fatherless kid from a modest background. So, you decided to take what was mine. He flinched at the bluntness of my statement but nodded. When you moved to the apartment in town, Megan started talking about how the beach house was wasted, sitting empty most of the time. How it could be our summer home. How we could host her family the way she'd grown up seeing her parents host friends at their lake house. I thought of Megan's letter, her description of feeling entitled to what I had. And you began to agree with her. Gradually, yes. We were struggling with mortgage payments on the apartment, while this valuable property sat mostly unoccupied. It started to seem unfair. He ran a hand through his hair. Then when you left the stove on... I didn't leave the stove on, Robert. Megan did, while helping with Thanksgiving dinner. I pointed it out at the time. His expression registered. Genuine shock. She told me you'd left it on, that you seemed confused when she mentioned it. I shook my head, pieces falling into place. She was already laying groundwork, creating a narrative of my supposed decline. I believed her, he admitted, shame evident in his voice. Or I chose to believe her because it served what I wanted. Either way, I failed you completely as a son. We sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, Thomas's pride and joy, recently restored to its place, marking the passage of time. I received a letter from Megan, I said finally. She mentioned you've separated. He nodded. The court case forced me to see who she really was, and who I had become when I was with her. I'm not blaming her entirely. I made my own choices. But there was a dynamic between us that brought out the worst in me. And now? I'm in therapy, he said with a faint, self-deprecating smile, trying to understand how I could have betrayed the person who has loved me most consistently throughout my life, working to pay the restitution, starting over in many ways. I studied him, this man who was my son and yet, in some fundamental way, a stranger to me. I had carried him, raised him, loved him with the fierce, uncompromising devotion that only a parent can understand. The pain of his betrayal ran soul deep, and yet, I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, I said honestly. I know, he replied, his voice breaking slightly. I wouldn't expect you to. But, I continued, I'm willing to try to build something new. Not what we had before, that's gone, but perhaps something else, based on who we are now, with clear eyes about the past. Hope flickered across his face, quickly tempered by realism. I would like that. Very much. On whatever terms you're comfortable with. We talked for another hour. About his work, about my plans for the trust to convert the beach house into a retreat center someday, about neutrals. Topics that allowed us to reestablish some tentative connection. When he rose to leave, the atmosphere had shifted from formal tension to cautious openness. At the door, he hesitated. Can I come again? Maybe help with some of the garden work or repairs around the house? I considered his request, weighing my lingering hurt against the possibility of healing. Yes, I decided. But slowly, Robert. One step at a time. He nodded, understanding the boundaries I was establishing. One step at a time, he agreed. After his car disappeared down the driveway, I returned to the porch swing, Thomas's favorite spot for contemplation. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the ocean in bands of gold and rose. A pair of sandpipers raced along the shoreline, their spindly legs a blur of motion against the wet sand. The conversation with Robert had drained me emotionally, but there was also a curious sense of completion. Not resolution exactly, but acknowledgement. We had spoken truths that needed to be spoken, begun the long process of reconstructing what had been broken. As twilight deepened into evening, I found myself thinking of Thomas, of our early days in this house, of the struggles and joys we had shared, of the legacy we had created. He would have been heartbroken by Robert's actions but would have found a path toward forgiveness, just as he had taught me to do throughout our marriage. The measure of a life well lived, he used to say, isn't the absence of storms, but how you rebuild after them. I had rebuilt my home, my sense of self, potentially even my relationship with my son. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. The wounds would always be part of my story, but they no longer defined it. The following morning, I woke before dawn and walked to the shoreline as the first light touched the eastern sky. The tide was receding, leaving behind intricate patterns in the sand and small treasures for those observant enough to notice. Shells, smooth stones, the occasional sand dollar. I bent to pick up one such sand dollar, perfectly preserved despite its journey through rough waters. Holding it in my palm, I thought about resilience, how the most fragile-seeming things sometimes possess unexpected strength, how what appears broken can retain its essential beauty. Returning to the house, I placed the sand dollar on the windowsill beside the small lemon tree Robert had brought, symbols of ending and beginning occupying the same space, just as grief and hope, disappointment and possibility coexisted within me. Later that day, I called my lawyer to finalize the details of the trust that would eventually transform the beach house into a sanctuary for those who needed healing by the sea. I specified that while the main purpose would be serving single-parent families, there should always be space for reconciliation between estranged family members, a place where difficult conversations could happen, where new understandings might emerge. Over the following months, Robert and I established a careful rhythm of Sunday visits. Sometimes we worked together on house projects, repainting the shutters, rebuilding the garden fence, tasks that required cooperation without demanding deep emotional engagement. Other times we simply sat on the porch, watching the eternal dance of waves against shore, gradually rebuilding conversations that could include both painful truths and everyday observations. Megan eventually moved back to Ohio permanently. Robert told me she had found a job teaching elementary school, a fresh start in her hometown. I wished her well, not out of false magnanimity, but from the genuine recognition that bitterness would only poison my own peace. 1 year after the court hearing, I hosted a small gathering at the beach house. Diane, Dr. Winters, Thomas Gallagher and his wife, Sheriff Daniels, and a few other friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. Robert was there too, still somewhat separate from the group, but making sincere efforts to connect. As we gathered around the dining table, the same table where so much of my family's history had unfolded, I looked at the faces of these people who had helped me reclaim not just my property, but my sense of agency and dignity. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass, "to rebuilding, houses, relationships, and ourselves." The glasses clinked together in the warm evening light, the sound like a small bell of affirmation. Later, as the sun set in a spectacular display of crimson and gold, I stood alone on the porch, feeling the solid presence of the house behind me. The house Thomas and I had built board by board, the house I had fought to protect, the house that would someday shelter others seeking their own healing and renewal. The path forward wasn't perfect or certain. Trust, once broken, never returns in exactly the same form. But I had discovered something more valuable than perfect resolution: the capacity to begin again, to find meaning in difficulty, to create beauty from brokenness. As darkness fell and stars appeared one by one above the endless expanse of ocean, I remembered Thomas's words on the day we had first stood on this property, imagining the home we would build. The most important foundation isn't in the ground beneath us, it's in here. He had touched his heart, then mine. As long as that's solid, we can weather anything. My foundation had been tested, shaken to its core, but it had held, and upon it, I had built something new, not a replica of what was lost, but something authentic to who I had become through trial and transformation. The house lights reflected on the dark water, a beacon of warmth and welcome against the vastness of night. Inside and out, everything had come full circle, changed, challenged, but ultimately reclaimed. Not as it was before, but as it was meant to be now. A testament to resilience, a monument to rebuilding, a home once again.